Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl Mini Mindset Reset. I'm your host, Danielle. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, and author, one thing has become abundantly clear. So much of what gets in our way in our daily lives is not only how we think, but what we think, our mindset. Because of that, every other week, I'm taking your requests and questions and handing over quick, easy to use, practical strategies and life tools to help you shift your thinking, create calm, help you understand and express your emotions, harness your inner power, and learn how to navigate your personal story in 15 minutes or less. After all, how else can you get your life together? So let's shift your perspective with the tools and conversations that help you in the throes of change. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast mini mindset reset starts right now. Did you know that most people have a common failure pattern? Air quotes around failure, right? It's true. Most people have strategies that they engage in that causes them to struggle or even fail, even if they desire to win or have their mind set on a positive outcome. Knowing your patterns are important, and it's the subject of this week's Mindset Reset. Kayla from the UK wrote in and said, Danielle, I often feel stuck. I've read books, I've worked with a therapist, I've listened to your podcast on being stuck, but I keep wondering if the problem isn't actually me. I spend a lot of my time thinking about how hard it is to make changes, and then I stop myself from doing the work. I know that I'm being unrealistic about how long it takes for change to take place, and I'm constantly beating myself up. I always feel like a failure. I know this is a pattern for me, but I just don't know how to change it. Can you help? Absolutely, Kayla, I can. And knowing there's a pattern in our lives that work against us is the first step to discovering how we can alter our practices, our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions. Before we dive in, I want to say something that you may have heard me say, quite often, but it's so true, and it is this. No one, and I mean no one, has the ability to fail all of the time. At every moment, at anything that they do or everything that they do, it's simply not possible. The feeling of such is a belief that you've created. I am failing or I am a failure. In order to progress in your life, you have to remove that belief. And the first step in doing so is to look at what I call anti-success strategies. So what is an anti-success strategy? It is exactly as it sounds, right? They are patterns of behaviors, of thought, of feelings that keep us in this sense of failure and away from meeting ourselves in our true intentions and desires. There's actually only 3 major strategies, and of course, there's a lot of things that go under it, but let's talk about these 3 things that nearly everything that we do falls into when we're talking about feeling like a failure. And when we get through that, I want to give you a quick reframing ability so that you can get out of this habit, this really unhelpful, unhealthy habit. So the first strategy that most of us use against ourselves comes down to simply belittling ourselves. It's belittling our needs or even our achievements. How many of us have this inner critic that loves to create drama in our lives? I know I've had it for a long time before I eradicated it out of my life. And so many of the women that I have worked with and still work with deal with this on a daily basis. That critic lies and it says, you are not good enough. You can't do this. Or when we receive a compliment, we brush it off. We say, oh, it was nothing, or it's not that big of a deal. When we listen to that inner bad girl, and not inner bad girl in a good way, or we refuse to own something that we've done that would best support our intentions and desires, guess what? We create a constant sense of nothing being good enough, or that everything that we do is not good enough. And then we always feel like we are failing. We cannot have a constant stream of negative thoughts and feelings directed inward and live a life of making big positive steps forward or living a life of having wins. It's just not possible. So we have to check our inner dialogue. I'm not going to lie to you. Many women hate this process. It's a tough one. But if you want to check that inner dialogue, you should carry a notebook around for 3 to 5 days and write down the negative thoughts that you have about yourself. Write down when you belittle your efforts and your greatness. Write down when you perceive that you are failing. What you are most likely to find at the end of this time period is that you have very similar thoughts all day long, and those may likely be the actual feelings of failing and not necessarily action, right? So you feel like you're failing because of the conversation you're having with yourself, not because of the actions you are taking. And that's so important, because if it's just the inner conversation, but you're still showing up, we can eradicate that feeling by eradicating the voice. So important. The next strategy is moving the goalpost. I see this so often, and again, I have been guilty of it myself. But one big way of always feeling like you're failing is to move the goalpost. What does that mean? It means that you have an end result in mind. So you have the goal and you're focused, all of the efforts, all of the hurdles, everything that you want to do and think about is focused on that end result. And you knock it down really quickly, right? It becomes so easy that you hit that mark. And at the end, you turn around and think, wow, that was probably too easy. And so you begin to add to the end goal. You begin to think that you need to add something more because it shouldn't have been that easy. And that process is moving the goalpost, okay? And when you move the goalpost, guess what happens? We tend to overthink. We tend to challenge ourselves to the point that we have zero ability to ever create the new desire. We push ourselves to the point of obstacles that steals our ability to own our first outcome, to own the effort, to own the results. And when we push ourselves so hard to create something new and we don't celebrate what was before us, guess what? We feel like we failed. What is that sense of failure going to do? It's going to ignite that inner dialogue. It's going to wake up that inner bad girl, and we are now in a cycle. So we have to really check our ability to stay within our end results, our end goal, without moving the post before we celebrate the wins. That's another element to all of this. We are result-oriented by nature. And if we never celebrate the wins, big or small, it really doesn't matter. We rarely have a sense of accomplishment. This strategy has a way of taking over our lives, and it's a big one that leaks into everything we think, feel, and do. How many people have said, if I just lost a little bit more weight, I'd be happy. Or when things happen, I will be happy. If I went a little bit further, I will celebrate then, right? These are the things that push the goalpost. Don't fall into this trap. The feeling of failure is waiting at the bottom. I promise you. So the last one is denial. So not admitting or giving yourself permission to own what you need and want. Denial is actually a form of self-protection, right? So this is so important to understand. Denying ourselves is this idea that if we limit ourselves, we cannot fail. So there's the protection. I feel like if I do something big that I may actually fail, so I'm going to hold that at bay. We keep ourselves back from taking risk. We don't want disappointment. And we even keep ourselves stuck in relationships and work environments that don't work for us. Denial is failure because we don't allow ourselves to have, be, or do what we wish and need. What happens then? We feel as if we never have a baseline for or to happiness. Denial is something that is really, really nasty. It's something that keeps us in our comfort zones. It's in a place that really can own us. So we want to make sure that we're not denying what we need and want. It's also really useful to question this label of failure that we have. If you look at failure itself, we really do learn every time that we have an experience that we, quote, fail. The question becomes, is it good learning? If we fail and then use it against ourselves, of course, that's not good learning. But if we fail and create new belief systems, new conscious efforts and thought patterns, we refuse to lean into self-blame and worthiness, guess what? We actually can create a sense of accomplishment out of the failure. But we have to ask, is this really failure? So this is where I want you to think about your definition of failure. What does that mean to you? You know, it is a very personal experience to feel as if you failed. And for most of us, we have this idea that perfection is our end goal. But again, the only time or the only way that perfection can actually be defined is by the individual holder of the definition. You know, with this idea, with this understanding, I want us to reframe failure and these anti-success strategies. If you've listened to me on the podcast or on Instagram or TikTok or on my website, you may have heard me walk you through this process with our thoughts, but we can actually do the very same thing with our feelings, and we do it with questions. So what does reframing do for us? It helps us see the experience from a new interpretation. It's like being our own bestie and giving ourselves advice, right? It helps us think from the beginning of the thought, feeling, or action to determine if we miss something or if this is a pattern or maybe even just a moment. An everyday example of this would be like realizing that something didn't pan out the way that we had hoped, but it's actually an opportunity for something better. That is reframing, right? So we had a failure or something didn't work out, but now we know something more is on its way. Or using a different word when it comes to a thought like I failed, where you switch that to I didn't hit my goal yet. The idea of yet leaves the door open to create a new outcome. We can reverse these patterns by first identifying where we may fall into that area of 3. So do we fall into the belittling or the goalpost moving or denial? And then we can ask ourselves some questions. I'm going to give you a couple so that you can kind of see how the reframing works. In the terms of belittling, we could say, what about this thought or feeling is making me feel like a failure? What about this experience is uncomfortable for me? For moving the goalpost, we can say, am I celebrating my first goal before I moved forward? Will moving the goalpost benefit me, or should I stop and allow the next part of my plan to unfold naturally instead of pushing or efforting? For denial, you could ask, am I keeping myself back in hopes of nothing causing more negative feelings or experiences, or am I holding myself back to begin with? If you need another perspective on anything, put it into another setting and see how it looks. So I am a failure. Take a look at that from another viewpoint. If this was someone else that was taking action, how would you feel about it? What would you say to them? Give yourself another vantage point. When we reframe, we open ourselves up to the truth. We realize that we're not always failing, but perhaps we are stopping ourselves, or perhaps we're not celebrating ourselves, or perhaps that inner bad girl has taken over and we're a failure because she likes drama. Perhaps we are not allowing ourselves to do what we need, and therefore we are stuck and feeling like we're constantly failing. I'll say it again. You are not failing. You may be using your greatness against yourself, but now that you know, you can change the pattern. You can make small shifts and give yourself the ability to move forward. I hope this helps. Kayla, thank you for the question. I'm going to challenge you to keep going in your growth journey. I hope that you see that you're not always failing. I encourage everyone else to do the same. Honor where you are. Be in your life. There's greatness within and around you. You're not failing 100% of the time. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl mini mindset reset. If you have a subject or strategy request, email us at getyourlifetogethergirl@gmail.com. Or you can visit our website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com. If you're looking for daily inspiration or tips and tools, join the growing community at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Thank you for being a valuable member of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.